The recent raid of homes of some judicial officers over alleged corruption has continued to elicit reactions. It's indicative of the anti-corruption stance of President Muhammadu Buhari when he assumed office on May 29, 2015. The cleanup continues through the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, which is charged with the responsibility of implementing required reforms in Nigeria's criminal justice system. This week's edition looks at the federal government's fight against corruption. Hello there. Thank you for joining me on the program this week. I'm Gloria Umezuke. Corruption has been described as the nation's greatest challenge as it's been blamed for poverty rates, reduced life expectancy, high mortality rate, and even the deterioration of standard of living. It's indeed the enemy of development and good governance. In this regard, my guest, the Executive Secretary of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, takes us through their findings so far and what perhaps lies ahead. But coming up next. Nigeria needs an upright judiciary without which the nation's democracy would collapse. That's the view of the chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, Professor Ise Sage, when the committee presented its 2015 to 2016 report. Take a listen. The sudden raid of some judges' houses by operatives of the Department of State Services and the subsequent arrest of judicial officers last week drew a plethora of reactions, which is yet to abate. The Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption described the president's anti-corruption crusade as right and criticisms from Nigerians as totally wrong and shocking.
We need a judiciary, but we need an upright judiciary. Without that, one arm of government would collapse. Democracy would collapse. Let us think of the implication of what's going on. So if we don't put the judiciary right, if we don't have a judiciary in which we have confidence, a judiciary with integrity and honor, a judiciary with moral authority, then we have no government and we have no democracy. There are Nigerians who are now saying, oh, we are suffering a lot of hardship now since the Buhari government came. We were better off under corruption. Isn't that the most terrible thing for anybody to mouth, without considering what would have happened if Buhari had not come?
If DSS knows his job or has known his job over the years, he should have been involved in corruption cases. Because my argument in a paper I've written before is that the DSS actually should, in training their staff, particularly the senior officers, influence their perception to see corruption as a security issue.
In its report from August 2015 to July 2016, the Executive Secretary highlighted areas of concentration. Amongst other things, the committee clearly mapped out sentencing guidelines for high-profile cases where huge monies are trapped.
This contract was awarded 10 billion. It was not done. So we bring you and bring contractor. Where is 10 billion? The money left government. Road has not been done. Where is 10 billion? If you sit down and do simple arithmetics of all those high-profile cases, just add the sums and see how much you come up with. It will be far above 2 trillion. Far above 2 trillion. Just add it up like that. Because the state has not recovered the money. If we have the money, we will see the effect in the economy.
Looking forward, the committee hopes to scale up interactions across the board to reduce corruption in the country. I had a conversation with Professor Bolaji Owasonye on the President's anti-corruption drive. Professor Owasunwoye, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Well, now, quickly, in the last 1 year, you have been involved in promoting the anti-corruption war of the present administration. What were your findings right now and even your experience?
Findings, I think that there's a lot of apathy to fighting corruption, especially elite apathy. And elite apathy is to be expected in a way because elites are highly complicit in corruption. They have access to resource and obviously have helped themselves to it, especially politically exposed persons. So that's the experience that, ironically, people want to change or want to see change, but do not want to change. Secondly, it appears to us that people want change on their own terms, not on the terms that are legal or that are universally recognized and acceptable. That if a country would not want to collapse, there are certain measures it has to take. And in this regard, the president, of course, is ready to take those measures. His will and his pedigree in this area is totally unquestionable. The challenge is that everybody agrees rhetorically that yes, corruption is a monster that we need to fight, but when it comes to doing the needful, then people begin to evaluate how it's going to affect them. In other words, many people have been living a false life that this whole anti-corruption crusade is now challenging, and that is bringing resistance. So when you hear that corruption fights back, it's because of this self-interest in a way that you begin to see that, especially from complicit elites.
Well, what were the most shocking findings that you discovered about?
I think the most shocking thing for us when we started doing this assignment is the fact that people could heartlessly, without any reflection on the implications of what they were doing, that people could heartlessly privatize the state. You know,
what do you mean?
You use your opportunity of occupying public office or having a friend who is in public office or a relative who is in public office, you know, or just to help yourself. And the way it was done with such high level impunity that people didn't think there would be some day of reckoning or that anybody would even look. Because I think that there was some assumption that, look, I'm not the only one, everybody is doing it, so I'm going to do mine. And we're talking of not just people who are high up there, even middle level people, even middle level officers in the public service or civil service, or people who had access to resource and all that. Everybody just helped themselves in the most primitive manner or did things, you know. On the other hand, you would then see another group of people who knew what was going on, who were offended by it because they did not benefited in any way and perhaps never planned to benefit. But because of this endemic destructive culture of silence, refused to say anything.
Who are the group of people you refer to?
Well, everybody is suffering from this culture of silence. When you see something that is obviously wrong and you try to rationalize it by putting personal interest above community interest, you know, you are already guilty of that. You become a part of the problem, because whatever happened in all of the agencies and in the places where right now the president's anti-corruption war is unearthing, people already knew about those things. They knew that these things were wrong, they knew these things were happening, but they never said anything. So you could sort of resolve that, you know, or in one of two ways. It could be one that they were afraid, or that, well, they said, I'll wait for my turn.
Do you want to give us a tangible example?
If you look at what's been the revelations in the arms procurement, for example, certainly there were human beings walking around, you know, this institution, the military, and who did not benefit from this, but who knew what was going on. But they never said anything, or they were scared to say anything. But they could have also found ways in this day of digital technology, social media, they could have found other ways to let out what they knew obviously was creating a problem for the country. They knew that the money meant to kit the army. They knew that the money meant to secure the integrity of the nation. They knew the money meant to diminish insurgency was being stolen by individuals. And they simply either looked the other way or looked for an opportunity to have their share, irrespective of the consequences of what they knew was happening, and they refused to challenge. And the funniest thing is that everybody professes one faith or the other. You know, you are either Christian or Muslim, so we believe in something. And both religions do not tolerate this kind of thing that we're talking about. So it's not just the people that are now being mentioned as having perpetrated who knew what was going on. There were others who knew but preferred to see no evil, hear no evil, even though they were being affected by the evil.
Let's talk about plea bargaining, an introduction you expressed some full support for. But many people have faulted that introduction as saying that it's not going to be good for the present anti-corruption fight. How would you react to this particular introduction?
I think that there's a lot of ignorance out there about what plea bargain is all about. Plea bargain is not a trade-off for you to go home and sin no more with no sanction. Our recommendation for high-profile corruption cases is that plea bargain must not be accompanied by no prosecution agreement. In other words, if you plea bargain and all that, it does not mean that government does not reserve the right to prosecute you again. Okay? So we've never said that. But more importantly, what people need to recognize is that we have plea bargain provisions in our laws. Those laws were made by our lawmakers for us. Those provisions were discussed publicly, okay, not challenged, not resisted, been lying there dormant. And then all of a sudden, as part of our work as a think tank, we've looked at everything. We've looked at our environment. We recognize that this can help this anti-corruption effort. And then people are saying, oh, no plea bargain and all that. There is a whole load of ignorance about what plea bargain is. I recognize that there is a fear that plea bargain may be misapplied.
Exactly, that's the point.
So let's separate the wheat from the chaff. Let's separate the wheat from the chaff. Let's say we recognize it's not only plea bargain that can be misapplied. It's any other policy, any other principle, any other measure that government introduces can be misapplied.
As a means of settling corruption cases.
Good. Now, what does plea bargain entail, for example? If you are arrested for corruption and you choose to cooperate with the state and to help the state, and there's a range of punishment from 1 day to 1 year. In a plea bargain arrangement, okay, you can get the lower punishment as opposed to getting the higher punishment. We have never said return the money and that's it, free. The decision to prosecute you remains that of the state, and it retains that prerogative. And the plea bargain manual strategy document, which we have released, makes sure that the mischief that the public is afraid of does not happen.
In what way?
I'll tell you, we categorize what is a high-profile corruption case, in which case the state will give you no concession whatsoever. For example, it affects the security of the state, it affects the economic integrity of the state, it has international dimension. Are you following me? Even though it is perpetrated by a politically exposed person or a non-politically exposed person, the consequence of which has deleterious impact on the state. So there is a whole range of things that you need to evaluate. In all of those cases, it is a high-profile corruption case. It means that your concessions are almost zero. On the other hand, plea bargain does not exist only for the rich and the powerful. Plea bargain
that's
is
where
for,
basically it's applied.
The provisions in the law does not focus the rich. It focuses everyone. You, if you run into problems with the law, say a traffic offense, and they say, oh, you are a responsible person, you are a respectable person, you've committed this offense, okay? The state can choose to say, okay, out of 2 or 3 offenses, you get the lesser one in recognition of who you are and what you are, okay? On the other hand, if it's a high-level crime that has had terrible impact, the state can say, sorry, we will not plea bargain. And all this is documented. So we have not said that those who have committed grievous crimes against the state should go home. We have said the exact opposite. But we have created a framework that allows plea bargain provisions to be used. Now, the reality is that there is no country in the world that can prosecute successfully all offenses that are committed against the state. It's not possible. If you look at traffic offenses, how many traffic offenses can the state effectively prosecute? So in the majority of cases, you plea bargain many of them. But you look at the effect on the society. When it has very serious effect, what we have said is that don't plea bargain. And we've categorized how to recognize that.
All right, hold on with your thought. We'll take a break right now. When we return, we'll continue with more on the president's anti-corruption drive. Stay with us.